Okay, thank you, everyone. I think we're ready to get started. Hello, my name is Kristen Evangelista. I'm the director of the William Patterson University Galleries. Thank you so much for joining us today for this artist talk by Marion Wilson, who is currently exhibiting at the University Galleries in a solo exhibition titled "The Landscape is Sanctuary to Our Fears." And I first want to thank the faculty who are here with us today. I'd like to thank the faculty who brought their classes to join us. I'm going to give a brief introduction of Marion, and then she's going to give us a talk about her exhibition, and then we will have time afterwards for questions. And then last but not least, we are having a reception following this talk in the University Galleries. So I encourage you to come to the gallery because there'll be food and refreshments, and most importantly, you'll get to see the artwork in person, which is really important. First of all, I just want to say it has been a pleasure to work with Marion Wilson. We started on this project 2 years ago. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her background. Through her practice, Marion Wilson builds collaborative partnerships with botanists, architects, and mostly urban communities by accessing individual expertise and working non-hierarchically. As an associate professor at Syracuse University from 2007 to 2017, she institutionalized an art curriculum called New Directions in Social Sculpture. Wilson is the founder of MLab, which is an abbreviation for the Mobile Literacy Art Bus, and the Mobile Field Station, a mobile eco-art lab housed in a collaboratively renovated RV. She also founded 601 Tully, which was a renovated, abandoned 1,900 square foot residence that was turned into a neighborhood art museum in the west side of Syracuse, New York. She holds a bachelor's degree from Wesleyan University, a master's from Columbia, and a master's in fine art from the University of Cincinnati. She is exhibited at the New Museum of Contemporary Art, Frederica Taylor Gallery in New York, the Herbert Johnson Museum at Cornell University, Dorsey Gallery in Long Island City, Exit Art, Hall Walls, and Spaces in Cleveland, Ohio. She has been awarded numerous residencies, including at the Malay Colony for the Arts, at the International Studio Program in New York City, Sculpture Space in Utica, New York, and most recently at the McCall Center for Art and Innovation in Charlotte, North Carolina. So this exhibition really draws upon numerous collaborations. So I want to thank some of the people who were integral to the exhibition. From the outset, we worked very closely with Professor Nikki Davi, who's here today. She's a professor of environmental science, and we worked with her and her undergraduate students last semester to jointly conduct stream studies of the Passaic River watershed, which inspired a large part of Marion's artistic practice. Marion also did a lot of research to get to know the history of Patterson, and we were also able to arrange artifact loans from the Patterson Museum's director, Jack DeStefano, and curator Heather Garside. In addition, we would like to thank Evelyn Hershey, who's the education director at the American Labor Museum at the Botto House in Haledon. The artist Tat Futan provided plant-based pigments for several of Wilson's paintings, and another artist, Zach Siebold, generously loaned a table, which is on display in the exhibition. The exhibition is also funded in part by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and I'd like to introduce Marion now.
Thank you, Kristen. I have to stay put behind here so that it works on the videotape. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's great to be here again. I've been here once before with Michael's class. I wanted to start by thanking some people. Also, I wanted to obviously thank Kristen Evangelista, who wrote the grant to the National Endowment for the Arts. And it really was such a pleasure to receive that funding and then kind of know what to do for the next year. and be funded to make this new body of work. So I'm deeply grateful to that. And then also to Nikki Davi, who was written into the grant as well, and I spent some time with her class in the beginning, and really I borrowed something that she taught me for a whole half of the exhibition. So that was a really wonderful collaboration. And also want to thank some of Kristen's the gallery staff, Emily and Casey, and also a grad student, Taylor, who helped install the show, and then the Patterson Museum and the Bodo House. Okay, so what we have up here, I'm just going to go through, basically my talk is going to be explaining the exhibition. I'm not going to talk about any previous work. Obviously, I hope you go to the exhibition, but I think it's such an interesting, unusual kind of sculptural object of a space that I really thought about that in how I placed the work and even how I made the work. So I thought what I would do is give you kind of a gallery talk, but in here, to talk about how I might lead you through the space. And that also helps to talk about kind of how the year rolled out. So the first thing that I did was to spend time with Nikki Davies' class, and we did some testing of water quality. And if I were to go to the gallery, the first place I would go is that center room that has like the blue stripes, is like a room within the four walls, because that center space is all waters of my childhood. That's what I called it. And what I did, I'm going to pass this funny little jar around so that you get a sense of what I did, but also what Nikki taught me, which was that scientists go to bodies of water in New Jersey. We did that to a couple of streams, and they collect bugs, basically. They capture bugs underside of rocks or whatever through a net. And then the greater the diversity, the healthier the body of water. I don't know if I'm getting this right, but that's what I took out of it. So I thought, being an artist and just thinking about, obviously, the importance of that, but how I respond to water. And I brought in that kind of scientific process, but also a kind of more emotional way of thinking about water. So this is me doing some research, and then, where's the screen? So this is the inner space. This is Waters of My Childhood. And what I did is I went out and bought some bottles, and I revisited last summer, over a course of about 4 months, all of the bodies of water that I swam in throughout my life that I could remember. And some of them are in New Jersey. Most all of them are on the East Coast. A lot of them in like New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut. And I just kind of recreated this personal, evocative landscape of the water. And what I found was that several of the lakes had this big toxic algae bloom, like Lake Hopatcong, which is where you saw me in the previous slide. So this idea, or this feeling of pleasure that I had as a child visiting these lakes and swimming these lakes, was now replaced with science, and I could no longer swim in them. And this is a table that was built out of beams for the building at 601 Tully up in Syracuse that Kristen mentioned. Was built by a student. I borrowed it back for the exhibition. So then what I did was take those bottles and shake them up and make new landscapes and photograph them, and then printed them on Mylar. So I was interested in having them kind of return to a watery, milky kind of substance. And a lot of my work in this particular exhibition is on Mylar. Mylar, the work being a lot about water, but also a lot about memory. Mylar just seemed to be a good medium for that. And, anyway, so here are these photographs. And they wrap around that center room. And there's a couple of points I wanted to make. I like talking to students. I was a professor for a long time. I still am a professor part-time. And there's three kind of thematic points that I thought would be good to make. And one is, in the show, there's a kind of like repulsion, attraction, like even that jar passing around, like she's making a face while she's looking at it, you know. It's like kind of disgusting, but then there's also a beauty to it, and how can we can be like attracted and repelled by things at the same time. So that's something that's in the exhibition. And then also this idea of what's not revealed. There's a photograph I'm gonna show you where I actually flip it around and show you the back side of the photograph. So I think that's something that's a really interesting artist strategy as well, what you don't reveal. And then the materials. Frequently I get told, oh, you work in a lot of different materials, which from a gallery's point of view means like, how would I sell you or market you? You know, you don't just make photographs or you don't just make paintings. And I think there is a really rich array of materials used in this exhibition, and I actually take great pride in that. I mean, I respond very like intuitively to different materials. I choose materials according to the concept that I want. I was trained as a painter, and there is a kind of painterly approach throughout a lot of it. I pay a lot of attention to light. But you'll notice that, and if you have questions about any of those three things, I'd be happy to talk about them more. So this is Waters from my childhood. And then I'm assuming everyone has seen the kind of sculptural object space gallery that it is. I thought about the four outside walls sort of as four different chapters in thinking about Paterson. When I was done revisiting these bodies of water that I had swum in, I thought, well, let me take a real look at Paterson, New Jersey. And I had moved from New York City to northern New Jersey when I was in about fourth grade. So I was familiar with this idea of migrating from one urban place out to New Jersey. And I spent a lot of time at the Paterson Museum, and I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but they were super generous with all the materials, and it's just also a really, really fun place to visit. But really, learning, believe it or not, that the waterfalls, like even seeing those waterfalls for the first time after living in New Jersey for years, that they were really the engine of this development of the textiles, of silk, and the importance of that water and the kind of exploitation of that water, and then also learning about the exploitation of the people who worked in the mills. So there was a whole phase, and it's actually great. I mean, anyone who's writing a book or working as an artist or whatever, is this whole phase of just research, and really that's what I did. I just brought in a lot of information and kind of worried about making the work in the last half of it. So I did all this different research, and also, but a starting point was, one, this space, this gallery space, and then also this long form poem by William Carlos Williams called Paterson. And he said, I mean, I read it, or I tried to read it. It's hard to read it out loud, it did better. But anyway, he had this quote that says, "The city is a man, it is not nature." And he talked about the human being lying down in the water, rushing in through his ears. And so I thought, okay, how about the city as a woman? And what does that mean? And so for me, the city as a woman being about nature and about history and about memory. So that's the kind of, I think that kind of is the kind of aesthetic, and it's the kind of feel. So there's not like a literal read about about silk, but those ideas are behind it. So this first wall is the silk wall, and there's just this sheen of silk kind of lumped in the middle of the wall. And then there's these two mulberry trees that I painted on Mylar on the side of the silk. And the mulberry tree would be what the silkworms would eat if they were actually growing, if they were trying to make their own silk in Paterson. It was all shipped here actually from China as raw silk. So I hung that like that. And it's actually taken from a Vincent van Gogh rendering of a mulberry tree. It's just a close-up. And then this is a better view of the actual gallery. And then I came around and This side is water, and I borrowed some cards, some jacquard textile cards from the museum, and created this kind of water. But then I also, as I was doing this research, a really important part of the show is that I kind of collapsed different time periods, different historic time periods. And there is a lot of autobiography in the show. I was raised, my dad was a politician, and I was actually raised in Manhattan, and my home life was very much imbued with the politics of the 1960s. There was no separation between like domestic life and public political life. And you'll see images of that woven in here. And I went back, when I was looking at all the historic photos at the Patterson Museum, I went back and looked at my father's historic photos, because he was a journalist, and then he was a state senator, and then he ran for Congress. And there was a similar kind of energy and vitality, and even some of the similar issues, and then again, similar issues of today, issues of migration, land, labor. So I noticed a real parallel between those three different time periods. So I wove different historical photos from different time periods. So you'll see that in the exhibition as well. And this is a photo that is on the left side of that card, the waters. That's the Statue of Liberty. That would be the arriving point of many of the immigrants that came over to work in Patterson. And it's actually it's a funny picture, because it's a picture of my dad sleeping on the Staten Island ferry. So of all the photos of him in action, more as a kind of public figure, here's one where he's actually fast asleep. I cropped it so you can't tell it's him. But I wanted this image of a person that you weren't quite sure who it was. And then this is what's very familiar to you all, presumably, the waterfalls. I'm assuming the students all know all about the waterfalls, right? Patterson Falls, right? Okay. Okay, so there's that wall. Okay, then you come around, and this is the wall of strike or protest. It makes a better impact in person. These are all installation shots that I took on my phone. So here's a woman protester from 1917. This is outside of the American Labor Museum. This is a protest on a Sunday afternoon. A lot of the protests were held outside of the Bodo House, which was a mill worker's house. It was a family of 4 daughters, actually, and it then became the American Labor Museum. And then this is a photograph. This is the back of a photograph, and I mentioned to you about what's not revealed, and it says, Dr. King's funeral, Atlanta, Georgia, for personal use only, not for reproduction. So when I was scanning through my dad's archives, sort of parallelly to the Patterson Museum archives, I noticed that on the back of the photograph, and I'll show you the actual front of the photograph, but I ended up including the back of the photograph instead, because I just thought it referenced a time period without actually needing the image. But this is taken of my dad as a journalist at the Martin Luther King's funeral. And then this is me as a child in New York City, campaigning. So this is what I was saying about the public-private life. And then this is the last wall. And these, I'm going to show you this image first. This is, we were used a lot as kids, not exactly as political props, but sort of, we were photographed a lot. So I made these paintings also on Mylar of images of me and my sister, but there's a way that the human returns back to nature also. So there's a kind of animistic quality to the show as well, where the kind of human person is substituted in for the natural. And this is actually a portrait of my dad. It's a kind of humor, laughing, but also kind of grimacing, dark image as well. And then this is my work table, and this is like the last part of the show, but I always find it really interesting to think about the way artists work. I mean, a lot of times I find actually going to studio visits is more interesting than actually looking at the exhibition. And you can see my process here. There's a journal where I visited all different parts of Patterson. I wrote poems of my own. And then these are jars of walnut ink made by Tap Futan, and some other study models and things like that. So that's the one part of the exhibition that I actually invite you to touch if you wanted to touch any part of the exhibition. And that is basically it.